Hey guys, and welcome to the end of the week. Welcome to Friday, and this is a little bit of a different review. Now, I did a version of this for patrons and channel members some time ago. That one is a little bit different than this. It was more full. It was definitely something where I was a little more raw and off the cuff with. But I did want to use this as sort of an exemplar because as Transformers fans, we often debate what is canon, what is not canon, how do things fit together, why do we have these continuity issues and gaps and whatnot. And a great example of this is the good, bad, and convoluted of the aligned continuity. And that's going to be our focus this time around in the latest GotBot True review. Hey all, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, your most humble of hosts, Dennis Moulton, aka GotBot. As always, please like, comment, share, of course subscribe, and while you're at it, light 'em up, baby. Hit that notification bell, please, as it helps me out a ton, and it lets you know when content of all sorts goes up here on the channel. Check out Machinery of Man, The Everything Factor, all the groups that I'm either a mod or an admin for, as well as all of my social media links, all in the description down below, and also in the description down below. And if you're in a position to help the channel to grow, you can use the donate link. Check us out on Patreon, see what we have to offer to you through spring, or of course hit the join button at any given time and become a channel member. And like I said, this is going to be the aligned continuity, but here's how we're going to do it. A little bit different because I kind of done it as a stream of consciousness when I originally broached this topic with my patrons and channel members. This is a little more refined and admittedly much shorter than what that is. Certainly much more simplified. We're going to try and do this really in 3 sections. The first section is going to be what is the aligned continuity along with what its goal was and what it includes. The second is going to be a very brief overview of what the aligned continuity timeline story is per se. And 3, where it went wrong, why it didn't work the way it was supposed to, and is there any lesson that we can take away from it. With those 3 sections in mind, how about we head out of here and take a closer look at the aligned continuity. Ah, yes. Continuity, that thing that a fan of any franchise seeks in order to have an understanding of the story, of the history, of the characters that they're dealing with. And for Transformers, one of the prime examples of continuity is the aligned continuity. There are indeed others, but the aligned continuity is a perfect study in what works and what doesn't work. Herein, we're going to cover exactly what constitutes the aligned continuity, what pieces of fiction are included within it, how has it kind of had bits and pieces of it adapted to other continuities, and what the overall storyline is for the aligned continuity, as well as where everything kind of went wrong. The overall goal was to create one grand unified universe. Seems like an easy enough goal. It was to run a decade from 2010 to 2020. Again, seems like you had a good time frame. It includes the Covenant of Primus, which, to be fair, a lot of the pre-war story has been adapted to everything from G1 to Unicron Trilogy and wherever it fits. But the Covenant of Primus, as well as the novels Exodus, Exiles, and Retribution, the video games War for Cybertron, Fall of Cybertron, and even The Dark Spark, which does have overtones with the live-action movie universe, Transformers Prime, Rescue Bots Academy, and Robots in Disguise 2015. Fun fact, Transformers Prime did start in 2010, and Rescue Bots Academy did at least end in 2020. So you sort of do have that decade there. It was to be guided by a brand Bible written by Aaron Archer and Rick Alvarez, as well as some others. This would provide the history and provide even pictures and a starting point for the entire universe and the entire continuity. That starting point would be an explosion of the void, the Big Bang, that created a sentient core of the universe known as the One. For now, here in Part 1, we have established a decade-long story plan, a goal of a unified universe, many pieces of fiction, because besides the main ones I mentioned, let's also not forget that it included comic books, Hall of Fame profiles, as well as generations bios. By the way, I'll note this too. I suppose in a roundabout way, it includes the Japanese-created Transformers Go, which in a way sort of replaces Season 3 of Transformers Prime, which was Beast Hunters. Instead of Beast Hunters, Go says that the Autobots and the Khans basically left Earth, or were seeking to leave Earth, and their conflict is with the Predacons led by not Predaking, but Dragontron. And they're in search of the Legend Discs. So it is a little bit of a departure. Important, though, worth noting. We have a goal. We have multiple pieces of fiction. And we have a decade-long story. But what is the story? So as we delve now into part 2, the story elements, please keep in mind that I'm not going to be exhaustive here. As well, everything was at least intended to be guided by what was called the Binder of Revelation, the Brand Bible. And while that itself didn't give every detail, it did give a number of guideposts that fiction was to follow in order to create this grand unified universe. It all began, as I previously said, with an explosion within the void that created the One, the sentient core of the universe. And as the universe expanded out from the One, it sought to find its equal, to find something of its power, of its intellect. And there was nothing. So, to keep itself from really going crazy, it created two personas. Unicron, who really sought to kind of correct the flaws and maintain order in this new universe, and Primus, who was, to be fair, a little bit easygoing. In time, they would split into two entities who would be at odds. The devil and God, if you will. And they would fight, and they would, sadly, kind of become mortal enemies. In time, they would use up a lot of their energy and need to rest, need to slumber. We didn't really know what was going on so much with Unicron. We just knew that one day he might show himself again. Primus, however, became very tired and realized that he had to rest, but he didn't want to lose track of what was happening. So, Primus became Cybertron, and within himself he created the Allspark and placed it within the Well of Allsparks, deep within the core of Cybertron, that could create life. And he created the original 13 Primes as his representative for when Unicron would rise again. However, the 13 were imperfect as well. You had the Liege Maximo, who manipulated Megatronus into killing Solus Prime. And this would create a very sad divide among the Primes. Equally, a lot of this had to do with the power of the Requiem Blaster, which was created specifically to stop Unicron, which they did when Unicron came hunting for his brother Primus. Unicron, defeated, would go into slumber, and bits of dust and debris would build around him, and in time, Unicron himself would become the core of Earth. This would forever link Cybertron and Earth, both with a god, if you will, sleeping within them. Both waiting for the day when conflict would rise. Both forever linked. In fact, the blood of Unicron would even become fossilized on Earth, and become fossilized Dark Energon. As for the Primes, they would end up kind of going their own separate ways. Megatronus would leave, feeling guilty over what he had done, vowing that one day he would return and seek ultimate revenge. Quintus left with the Ember Stone to create new life elsewhere. Alpha Trion, an alchemist, decided to stay on Cybertron as it became populated with new life. Autobots, Decepticons, or what would become Autobots and Decepticons, as well as the Predacons. One of the 13 would even decide that he would become like all of the other members of Cybertron, forgetting about his status as a Prime until one day his power would be needed, when desperation would call at a darkest time. So, as Primus slumbered as the core of Cybertron, and Unicron slumbered as the core of Earth, of course, humans and other biological life would develop on Earth. On Cybertron, in the meantime, the Well of Allsparks continued to create new life. Robots that were one day destined to become the Autobots and Decepticons. Not yet. They also created larger bots, the Predacons. But that wasn't all that was happening, because the universe, of course, is populated by many celestial objects, one of which was a giant red star that was passing by Cybertron with such ferocious heat that it drove all of the bots underground. Unfortunately, the Predacons were too large to hide. They were gigantic animals that had to stay on the surface. This marked the end of the Predacon lineage. They would now become extinct. They would become what were deemed the ancestors of the smaller bots. After the star had passed and the Predacons were no more, the bots underground would begin to emerge to the surface and create communities. The dark spark was discovered, and to keep it from falling into nefarious hands, it would one day be put under Crystal City. The Quintessons would also come, and they would manipulate this young species into thinking that they had been created by the Quintessons. The ideas of the Allspark and the Well of Allsparks became the stuff of legend. By the way, a lot of G1 fans have now adapted this as their creation of the Transformers as well. And instead of seeing the Quintessons as their creators, they too see the Quintessons as nothing more than manipulators. Under Quintesson authority, the Cybertronians would be treated terribly. Ratchet would eventually discover a Quintesson probe inside of a worker named Cold Welder. And that is when things for the Quintessons began to fall apart. The Quints, for example, claimed that they had taught these robots how to transform, but that wasn't true. The T-Cog was a piece of biology that had always existed ever since they were born from the Well of Allsparks. The Quintessons would establish a puppet council led by sometimes Sentinel Prime, sometimes Zeta Prime, sometimes Sentinel Zeta Prime. At no point was this council really in charge. They were all being manipulated by the Quintessons. Under Quint rule, bots from the Well stopped having names and were instead giving designations. Perhaps the most important designation to note is that of a miner who came from the Well as D16. Sentinel and the Elite Guard would eventually call Cybertronians to rise up and drive the Quints out, and a new golden age would begin. The golden age is one of those places where things begin to get a little messy, because some fiction would establish that the golden age here is led by Prime Nova or Nova Prime. Some would say Sentinel Prime. Some would say Nominus. Some would say Zeta. Some would cover this kind of whole time span and early war with a progression from Nova to Nominus to, I think, Zeta and then Sentinel. So it does get a little bit iffy. Nevertheless, in this new golden age, things were not perfect. A caste system would arise. One that was sort of started with the divide created by the Quintessons between consumer goods, the Autobots, and military hardware, the Decepticons. The workers, the miners, those that were bigger, stronger, would indeed become not only miners and laborers, but for entertainment purposes, also gladiators. Equally, this was a time of expansion where a space bridge network was established and colonization started to occur on Velocitron, Junkion, Aquatron, and so on. Trypticon Station was created. It hides Dark Energon and is manned by the unaligned Seekers. 8,000 years of this general structure and expansion exists before the Well of Allsparks begins to slow down. The Rust Plague starts to ravage the universe, and in order to stop its expansion, the Space Bridge Network needs to be destroyed. This cuts off complete worlds from one another. The Quintessons, falling back, inhabit Aquatron, and it is on Aquatron where they finally build the Alicons and, most importantly, the Sharkticons. Or rather than build, more manipulate them into being led. Generally affable and likable, the Sharkticons now become hungry and embittered, easily manipulated into becoming a new army for the Quintessons. With Alpha Trion, and to a lesser degree Alchemist, still on Cybertron, they simply stood back and watched social decline. The communities of Kaon and Slaughter City became great gladiatorial arenas. D16 would adopt the name of Megatronus and eventually Megatron, becoming one of the widely renowned gladiators. Drift would become Deadlock. Megatron would start to speak in extremist measures, hoping to become the next Prime. His buddy was far more calm. Who was his buddy? Orion Pax. If you will recall, one of the 13 Primes had decided that he would become nothing more than one of the people. That was Orion Pax, and one day that 13th Prime, Optimus himself, could be called upon. As Alpha Trion watched the decline, he hoped that Orion would be able to temper Meg's anger. Terrorists called the Decepticons began to undertake bombings and assaults, all in the name of Megatron, even though Megatron himself denounced these Decepticon terrorists. Certainly he was not their leader. Eventually Orion and Megatron would meet with the High Council. This was Megatron's chance to plead his case, to be the next Prime, to be the next great leader of Cybertron. However, the more calm Orion Pax won favor, and he was named as the next in line. Megatron, in his rage, would kill Halogen, and he would declare a war. This leads us directly into the war as depicted in the War for Cybertron and Fall of Cybertron games. Bumblebee, a young bot, is among the last batch of Transformers to be created by the Well of Allsparks before it goes quiet. Ultra Magnus would end up leading the Wreckers, and the Allspark itself would get fired into space to stop Megatron from making more of his disgruntled Decepticon followers. Megatron would therefore seek to spread dark energon. Of course, that would mean visiting the Trypticon station, where he would meet the Seekers. In the meantime, Windblade was sent by the Primes to hide on Earth. Sentinel Prime would become imprisoned by Megatron and the Decepticons on Kaon, and the core of Cybertron itself would become contaminated with dark energon. Orion, now going by Optimus, would take on the role of Prime after Sentinel died. In order to purge Cybertron of the dark energon poisoning from Megatron, Cybertron would basically need to be shut down and rebooted. This process would take millions of years. However, to keep a part of Primus's spirit alive, Optimus was given the Matrix of Leadership. With Cybertron poisoned, and Megatron successfully obtaining the Dark Spark itself and putting it in his own chest, in the hopes that its power would allow him to beat Optimus once and for all, things looked quite bleak. A lot of these events are a bit of a hodgepodge between the video games and the Exodus book. Naturally, if Cybertron itself had to be purged of dark energon and could not create life, it was also not in a position really to sustain life. And it was decided that the Autobots were going to have to leave aboard the Ark. The Dinobots were supposed to leave with them, but Swoop stayed behind. He had discovered a cache of energon that would be very valuable in their trip. But then his communications had stopped. The Dinobots search Cybertron in search of Swoop, and they run afoul of Shockwave. Shockwave is now, in essence, the one that controls Cybertron, as Megatron is himself preparing to leave to follow and destroy Optimus. The Ark and the Nemesis end up stopping at Velocitron, where there is another war going on, and Aquatron on their way to Earth. While on the way to Earth, The Nemesis would also stop at Junkion, where the Decepticons would manage to get from the core of the planet the Requiem Blaster, and in the process have Junkion tear itself apart. The Starseekers, a band of rogue pirates, would basically take the Junkions off planet. We were supposed to see them in Season 3 of Transformers Prime. As it stands, we're unclear what became of the Starseekers or the Junkions that they took with them. On Cybertron, what remained of the Dinobots and the Wreckers continued to try and fight against Shockwave, who had been left in charge. Thundertron, the leader of the Starseekers, and Megatron also had a skirmish, which Megatron, I do believe, won. On Aquatron, Megatron discovered the Sharkticons and managed to overcome Quintesson Control by way of General Tyrannicon. Oddly, we would not see the Sharkticons under Megatron's control, which makes one wonder if they stayed under the control of General Tyrannicon or reverted to the Quintesson. Similarly, some Decepticons got abandoned by the cause along the way, such as Deadlock, who reverted once again to being Drift and began to study martial arts under the Circle of Light. On Stone Age Earth, bots and cons would land and fight. A few genetically engineered Predacons would also be created by the Decepticons and give Earth its stories and legends of things like dragons. The Transformers on Earth would eventually leave or go into stasis lock. Some of those early genetically engineered Predacons would become fossils. Griffin Rock would become a prime location when it was settled in 1649 by Horace Burns. At this point, with all of that backstory given, really the events of Transformers Prime and RID 2015 unfold. And all of this really leads to Cybertron's eventual revival. Of noteworthiness is the crash of the prison ship, the Alchemor. Why was this noteworthy? Because it gave us Steeljaw, who released several Decepticons who were once loyal to Megatron. Megatron had given up his leadership after being enslaved by Unicron in Predacons Rising. But even with this revived Cybertron, things were not perfect because the new Cybertronian High Council was corrupt. They had a plan to revive the Decepticon Empire, which luckily was foiled by Team B with the help of Optimus and a few from Team Prime. Megatronus, during RID 2015, would also finally return to exact his long-awaited revenge. He sought to merge the Allspark with his Anti-Spark and destroy Primus and Unicron in the process. Naturally, this didn't happen. With Megatron's disappearance, at different points Starscream and Soundwave would loosely take up leadership of groups of Decepticons. The High Council wanted Megatron to once again return to lead a new Decepticon empire. Now, none of this occurred. None of this actually happened. By the way, it's also worth noting that there's a bit of a pocket universe here because of a side quest, really due to some time-traveling nonsense by Thaddeus Morocco during Rescue Bots. This is an extremely loose overview of a very convoluted timeline. But why is the story of the aligned continuity so convoluted? In fact, you, my faithful audience, may be sitting thinking to yourself, certain parts of the story don't seem to quite match up. That contradicts the video games or the novels. I didn't outline what happened in Transformers Prime or RID 2015. In fact, within the video games, we have loose connections to the live-action universe. Originally, when Transformers Prime was announced, it was supposed to link with the live-action movies as well, but that didn't happen either. Remember, the goal was one overriding universe as guided by the Binder of Revelation. So what happened? Really, according to Alvarez, the Bible of Revelation, or the binder of Revelation, if you will, was undermined time and again by really too many cooks in the kitchen of fiction. For example, Season 3 of Transformers Prime went with Beast Hunters instead of a return to Cybertron, where they would encounter pirates, the Starseekers, and presumably we would be introduced to more of the Wreckers and probably find out what the fate was of the Junkions. This would have led to Thundertron, which is why Thundertron got a release in the Transformers Prime line, and, as of this recording, will have an upcoming offering in the Legacy line. We also missed an apparent version of Tidal Wave that would be somehow linked with the Requiem Blaster. I would have loved to have seen how that part of the story would have worked out. By 2015, it was now going to have to be not so much a unified universe as a universal cluster, where everything kind of sort of works out if you squint and turn your head on the side. It was around 2015, if I'm not mistaken, when Alvarez and Archer left the Transformers division and the binder itself became somewhat dusty around the time of Robots in Disguise 2015. For example, in Robots in Disguise 2015, Grimlock is a Decepticon and green and black, but we know from the video games that the Dinobots weren't Decepticons, so they don't really fit together either. There are times where Optimus is one of the original 13 and he's not. There are elements here that have been adopted to other parts of Transformers fiction, such as the Quintessons being manipulators, as I mentioned earlier, of the G1 Autobots. Even something as who led that early golden age. Was it Nova Prime? Was it Zeta Prime? Was it Sentinel Prime? Was it Sentinel Zeta Prime? These things are unclear because the aligned continuity only holds water if you look at it through a bit of a squint test. If you're looking to see everything line up, won't happen. But guess what? That it doesn't happen for the live action franchise. It doesn't happen for G1. It doesn't happen for the various comic books. It doesn't happen for RID 2001, and so on and so forth. However, that being said, there are things that this helped establish and cement that really now have become great tenets of Transformers. Though it existed before, the idea of the spark really became entrenched here. The idea of Dark Energon became entrenched here. The idea of ancient Predacons and of the dynasty of the Primes being made up of 13. It helped to establish the division between the Decepticons and the Autobots and exactly why the Decepticons rose up, being lower class citizens. No, the aligned continuity most certainly is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But it is a great loose story to follow. And it is something that at least answers a lot of questions that fans have debated for years. In the end, what lessons can we take away now that we know what it was meant to be, some of the basics of the story, and where and why it went wrong? Too many cooks in the kitchen led to too many branches and deviations of the original intended fiction. So I think now we all have a little bit of an understanding about what entailed the aligned continuity, what its goal was, what the basic storyline, so to speak, is, and of course, why things went wrong. So what lesson can we really take away from this? I think the lesson is that all of us, when we debate things regarding continuity and canon, we are all, as fans, always correct and always wrong. Aligned continuity is one example, but you know what? The same thing holds true for G1. There are things there that don't necessarily line up, and in fact, North American and Japanese G1 really approach things differently. Same goes for things like Beast Wars, where you kind of have to use the squint test to fit it together. Me personally, I tend to say everything from North America in the cartoon, for me, is canon, and then we switch to the Japanese, and that goes right up, right to the very tippy-top bitter end of Beast Machines. And I guess in a weird way, you have to sort of adjust all of that to account for things like Beast Wars 2 and Beast Wars Neo, because they don't fit in cleanly or nicely exactly. Same, though, can apply to the movies, you know, the films. A lot of people will say, well, how could this happen because this already happened? Or like, you know, if the Autobots came to Earth in 1987 and that's not a reboot but a prequel, then how come Optimus and Bumblebee and them didn't really know Earth in the 2007 live-action movie? Maybe that'll be explained, maybe it won't. Maybe it's, again, you gotta do what sort of fits. Maybe the lesson here is that all of us, myself included, need to sometimes stop and take account for the fact that we have a lot of cooks in the kitchen and a lot of different creators with a lot of different visions. Perhaps one day we will get one clean, nice, overriding universe. But until then, my advice to you and my advice to me is fit in what you can the best way you can that makes the most logical sense to you. Because at the end of the day, we are all right and we are all wrong. I appreciate you guys coming by, giving me some of your extremely valuable time. I do know how important it is to you. If you're in a position to help the channel to grow, you can use the donate link. Check us out on Patreon. See what we have to offer to you through Spring, or of course hit the join button at any given time and become a channel member. While you're at it, please hit the subscribe button, man. Stick around, have some fun with us here on the channel, and don't forget that somehow, some way, each and every single day, you right there, you do make a difference in the world. And I look forward to the next time that you and I get together to have another visit, either in the live streams on Thursday nights, at the stop motion premieres, or the old-fashioned way, right here, inside the videos.